At 75, I realized that my signature still meant a great deal to them. My word, not so much. You must have felt this too, that moment when your presence is needed, but your voice has become optional. What I didn't expect was to discover just how far they were willing to go without consulting me, and even less that my simple silence could change everything. My name is Richard. I've spent the last 40 years building something solid. A logistics company that started with 2 old trucks and ended with contracts in 6 states. I didn't make a fortune, but I made enough for my family to live well. My wife, Margaret, passed away 8 years ago. Cancer. It was too fast for us to process, too slow not to hurt. I'm left with 2 children, Daniel, 47, and Rebecca, 43. Both grew up watching the business grow. Both worked there at some point. Neither stayed. Daniel went into the tech field. He lives in Seattle. He married a woman I've seen 3 times in 10 years. He has 2 kids who call me on my birthday because their mother tells them to. Rebecca stayed closer. She lives 40 minutes from me, works as a financial consultant, and has been divorced twice. No kids. She was always closer, or at least pretended to be. I officially retired 3 years ago. I sold the company to a group that kept me on as a consultant. I receive enough to live comfortably. The money from the sale was divided. Part was invested, and the other part I distributed to my children while I was still alive. I thought it would be simpler that way, to avoid future arguments. They were grateful. They said I was generous. I continued to help when they needed it. A new car for Rebecca, a down payment on a house for Daniel, trips, small loans that were never repaid, but also never collected. Everything seemed to be in its right place. I was reasonably healthy for my age. I still drove. I still read without glasses. I walked every morning. I participated in the veterans group on Thursdays. I had dinner with Rebecca once a month. I talked to Daniel via video every 2 weeks. It was a peaceful routine. Until about 6 months ago, I started noticing little things. Conversations that stopped when I entered the room, documents that Rebecca took away too quickly, questions about my health that came with strange frequency. Nothing alarming, just different. And you know how it is. When something changes in the behavior of the people around you, you notice, even if they think you don't notice. Before we continue, I want to ask you something. If you're listening to this now, if you recognize this type of situation, or simply want to follow the rest of this story, please subscribe to the channel and leave a comment telling me where you're listening from. It could be from your home, work, or the road. It doesn't matter. I just want to know that there's someone on the other side who understands, who has seen this happen, or who at least knows that these things happen. Because what comes next you'll recognize. I'm sure of it. The first time I felt something concrete was at a lunch at Rebecca's house. It was a Sunday. She had invited Daniel, who was passing through the East Coast for work. I thought it was strange that he hadn't let me know directly, but I let it go. When I arrived, the 2 of them were on the back porch talking quietly. They stopped as soon as they saw me. They smiled. They hugged me. Everything seemed too normal. You know when people try to seem natural, and precisely because of that, you realize they're not. During lunch, Rebecca mentioned she was reviewing some investments. She asked if I had consulted a financial planner recently. I replied that I hadn't, that everything was under control. She insisted, saying that at my age it was important to have someone organizing things. Daniel agreed. He mentioned a friend of his who worked with wealth management for retirees. I thanked her for her concern. I changed the subject, but I made a mental note of it. 2 weeks later, Rebecca showed up unannounced. She brought papers. She said she had gathered some suggestions from lawyers specializing in estate planning. She said it was just to make my life easier. That she could take care of everything. I just needed to sign some powers of attorney. Nothing definitive, just to speed up future decisions. I looked at her. I asked if there was any urgency. She said no, just a precaution. I said I would think about it. She became a little tense but didn't insist. I realized it early on. It wasn't concern. It was preparation. They were organizing themselves as if I were no longer fully capable. As if I were an issue to be resolved. not a person to be consulted. And the most curious thing, at no point did they ask me what I wanted, only what I could sign. I started paying more attention to the connections, to the visits, to the tone. Rebecca started calling me 3 times a week, always with some excuse. She wanted to know if I was eating right, if I'd been to the doctor, if I needed anything. Daniel would send messages asking about my finances, if I was managing to keep up with the bills, if it wouldn't be easier for him to access my bank account just to take a look. I would thank him. I would say everything was fine, and I would stay quiet. 3 months ago, Rebecca invited me to dinner at a restaurant I'd never been to, too fancy for a regular Tuesday. When I arrived, Daniel was there, from Seattle, without prior notice. They said it was a surprise, that they wanted to spend some time with me. We had dinner, we talked. And at the end, between coffee and dessert, Rebecca brought up the subject. She said they had been talking, the two of them, about me, about my future. They said they were worried, that I was too lonely, that the house was too big for a man my age, that maybe it was time to consider a change, something smaller, more practical, or perhaps a senior living community, a place where I would have company, activities, assistance. I listened in silence. I drank my coffee. And I asked if they had ever visited a place like that. Rebecca hesitated, then admitted that they had gone to see 2 options, just to get an idea. I nodded. I thanked them for their concern, and I said I wasn't interested. The atmosphere became awkward. Daniel tried to argue. He talked about security, about health, about practicality. Rebecca mentioned that the house could be sold, that the money would be useful, that I didn't need so much space. I remained calm. I said the house was mine, that I liked it, that I wasn't going anywhere. They exchanged glances. They insisted a little more. I repeated myself. They gave up. For now. On the way home, I thought about everything. I wasn't angry. I was understanding. They weren't planning my well-being, they were planning my departure. And what would come after that? The house was worth money. Selling it would make a future division easier. My move to a community would make me less present, less influential. Easier to manage. I stopped explaining myself, because I realized it was pointless. They had already decided on the script. They were just waiting for me to accept my role. I started observing more carefully. I noticed that Rebecca had a copy of my house key. She always had ever since Margaret died, for emergencies. But now she would come in unannounced. She'd say she was just stopping by to see if everything was all right. She'd rummage through drawers, look at mail. Once I caught her photographing documents on my desk. She said it was just to have a record, in case I lost something. I didn't argue. I just locked the desk after that. That's when I received a call from my bank. The manager, a woman who had been assisting me for years, asked if I had authorized anyone to request information about my account. I said no. She informed me that someone had called identifying themselves as my daughter, asking for statements and transaction details. They wouldn't release anything without my confirmation. I thanked her and asked the person's name. It was Rebecca. I called her that same afternoon. I asked her directly. She seemed embarrassed. She said she just wanted to make sure no one was deceiving me. That news websites always featured stories of elderly people being scammed, that she was just protecting me. I said I didn't need protection. She insisted. She said I was being stubborn. That soon I would need help, and it would be easier if she already had access to things. I said that when I needed it, I would ask. She hung up, irritated. Daniel called me the next day. He tried to mediate. He said Rebecca only wanted to help, that I should trust them, that they were my children. I asked if he also thought I was no longer capable of taking care of myself. He didn't answer directly. He said that wasn't it, but the silence that followed told me everything. They thought I didn't understand. They thought I was too old to realize, too slow to react, too trusting to be suspicious. But I realized it early on, very early on. And I decided I wasn't going to make it easy, not out of revenge, just because it was still my life, my money, my house, my decisions, and if they wanted so much control, they would have to wait, or try another way, which, as I already suspected, is exactly what they did. About a month ago, Rebecca showed up with a lawyer. She didn't warn me she was bringing someone. She simply rang the doorbell accompanied by someone. She introduced the man as Dr. Patterson, a specialist in estate law. He had a folder full of documents. They sat down in my office, and they started talking about the importance of me having everything organized, a lasting power of attorney, an updated will, joint accounts. Dr. Patterson was polite, professional. He explained each document calmly. He said it was all for my benefit. To avoid future complications, Rebecca added, saying that this way she could take care of me without bureaucracy, that if I got sick or confused or incapacitated, everything would be taken care of. I listened. I read the documents. And I said I would think about it. Dr. Patterson left the papers with me. Rebecca said he could come back the following week for me to sign. I didn't confirm anything. I just thanked her for the visit. After they left, I read every page, carefully. The power of attorney was extensive. It gave Rebecca total control over my finances, properties, and medical decisions. The will had been drafted so that everything would be divided equally between the two children, but with Rebecca as the sole executor. There was even a clause suggesting the immediate sale of real estate after my death to facilitate the division. All very well done, very nice, and completely geared towards their interests, not mine. I didn't sign. I put the documents in a drawer and waited. Rebecca called 3 days later. She asked if I had decided. I said I was still thinking. She got impatient. She said the longer I waited, the more complicated it would get. I said I wasn't in a hurry. She hung up, frustrated. It was around this time that I started noticing something more serious. I received a letter from my health insurance company. It stated that a beneficiary change request had been sent, but was pending confirmation. I hadn't made any such request. I called the company. They confirmed that someone had tried to change the beneficiary of my life insurance policy from estate to Rebecca Thompson, my daughter. I blocked the change immediately, and I didn't say anything to her. 2 days later, I received another letter, this time from the office that managed my investments. They informed me that they had received a request to transfer the management of the accounts to an authorized third party. Again, Rebecca. Again, without my authorization, I cancelled, and I began to understand the magnitude of what was happening. They weren't planning on waiting for me to die. They were planning on making me irrelevant while I was still alive, to have total control, to decide for me, and eventually to do whatever they wanted with what was mine. I stopped explaining myself, because I realized that anything I said would be interpreted as mental confusion, as old stubbornness, as an inability to accept help. So I stayed quiet. I continued living my life. I greeted Rebecca when she showed up. I talked to Daniel when he called, but I stopped sharing, I stopped trusting, and I started preparing myself, because I knew they weren't going to stop. They thought I didn't understand, and that mistake, as you'll see, was the biggest one they could have made. Rebecca started getting more insistent. The visits increased, always with some excuse. She brought a nurse just to do a checkup. I refused. She brought a real estate agent just to appraise the house. I asked him to leave. She got irritated. She said I was being difficult, that she only wanted to help me. I thanked her and closed the door. Daniel started calling me almost every day, always with questions about my health, my memory, if I was forgetting things, if I was having difficulty making decisions. I would answer that everything was fine. He insisted. He said he had read articles about cognitive decline, that the signs were subtle, that I might not notice them. I said I was lucid. He doubted it, and I let him doubt it. I realized they were constructing a narrative, in conversations with other people, with distant cousins, with neighbors. Rebecca mentioned that I was becoming more and more forgetful. Daniel commented that I wasn't the same anymore. Nothing very overt, just small seeds, planted here and there. So that when the time came, there would be witnesses, people who would say, yes, I noticed he was different, but I wasn't any different. I continued driving without problems, paying my bills on time, reading, talking, taking care of the house, participating in the veterans group activities. My friends didn't notice anything, because there was nothing to notice. The confusion was only in their heads, or rather, in the narrative they needed to be true. One day Rebecca showed up with papers from a geriatric clinic. She said she'd scheduled an appointment for me, a full evaluation. I asked why. She said it was routine, that everyone my age should have it done. I said I wasn't going. She insisted. She said that if I didn't go willingly, she'd have to take other measures. I asked what measures. She didn't answer, but the tone was clear. It was a threat. I decided to find my own lawyer, not Dr. Patterson, another one I'd known for years. Peter Lawson. He'd been my business lawyer when I was still running the company, a serious man, reliable. I scheduled a discreet meeting. I told him everything. I showed him the documents Rebecca had brought, the letters from the bank, the health insurance company, the investment firm. He listened in silence. Then he said something I already knew, but needed to hear from someone. "Richard, they're trying to establish that you're incapacitated. If they succeed, they can request a conservatorship. And then you lose everything." I asked what I could do. He said the best thing was to protect myself legally before they went any further, review my will, make everything absolutely clear, appoint an independent executor, create safeguards to prevent unauthorized changes, and most importantly, have a complete medical evaluation with doctors of my choice, to have official reports proving my full capacity. That way, if they tried to declare me incapacitated, I would have proof to the contrary. So I followed the advice. I underwent a battery of tests, cognitive, physical, psychological, everything documented. The results were clear. I was in full mental capacity, no signs of dementia, confusion, or any impairment. Peter drafted a new will. He appointed an independent executor, a former business partner of mine who had no relation to my children. He created a revocable trust that protected my assets while I was alive. And he registered everything with a notary, with a date, with witnesses, with indisputable legal validity. I didn't tell Rebecca or Daniel anything. I continued acting as before, answering calls, receiving visitors, listening to suggestions. But now I had a safety net, and they didn't know it. They thought I didn't understand. They thought I was vulnerable, and they kept pushing. Rebecca brought in a social worker. She said it was to assess my home environment. The woman came in, looked around, and asked questions. I answered politely. She left. Later I learned from Peter that Rebecca had requested an official report. She wanted to document that I was living in inadequate conditions, that the house was too big, too dangerous, too lonely. The social worker, however, wrote the opposite. She said I was fine, that the house was clean, organized, safe, that I seemed perfectly capable. Rebecca was furious. That's when they decided to speed things up. I received a court summons. Rebecca and Daniel were filing for partial guardianship. They claimed I was showing signs of cognitive decline, that I could no longer manage my assets, that I needed a guardian, and that they, as my children, were the most suitable to fulfill that role. They attached testimonies from people who supposedly had noticed my strange behavior. I didn't know any of them well. They had all been convinced by Rebecca. Peter sprang into action. He contested the request immediately. He presented the medical reports, the exams, the proof that I was lucid. He requested a hearing, and he prepared a solid defense. The judge scheduled the hearing for 3 weeks later. During that time, Rebecca and Daniel remained quiet. They didn't call. They didn't visit. They thought they had won, that it was only a matter of time. I continued living normally, but inside I was disappointed. Not angry, disappointed, because I realized they had stopped seeing me as a father. I was an obstacle, a problem, an inheritance they couldn't yet access. And they were willing to take away my dignity, my autonomy, my freedom, just to speed up the process. I arrived at the hearing accompanied by Peter. Rebecca and Daniel were there with Dr. Patterson. The judge was a woman in her 50s, serious, experienced. He listened to the arguments from both sides. Dr. Patterson presented the evidence, the failed attempts to help me, my refusal to accept support, my stubbornness, my distrust, all painted as signs of incapacity. Peter presented the reports, the recent exams, my history, my accounts up to date, my active participation in social groups, my valid driver's license, everything documented, clear, undisputed. The judge asked me questions directly about dates, about my routine, about financial decisions. I answered everything calmly, clearly, without hesitation. She then asked Rebecca why, if I was so incapacitated, no one besides her and Daniel had noticed. Why my doctor hadn't raised concerns. Why my bank, which had known me for decades, hadn't reported anything. Rebecca stammered. She said they were subtle signs that only close family noticed. The judge didn't seem convinced. The hearing lasted less than 2 hours. In the end, the judge denied the request for guardianship. She said there was insufficient evidence of incapacity, that I demonstrated full awareness and autonomy, and that the request seemed motivated more by financial interests than by legitimate concern. She warned Rebecca and Daniel about the consequences of unfounded requests. They left the room pale. I left feeling calm. In the parking lot, Rebecca tried to talk to me. She said they had done it thinking of my well-being, that they only wanted to protect me. I looked at her and simply said, "I realized it early on, Rebecca. Way too early." She didn't understand. I didn't think I needed to explain. Daniel called me that night. He tried to justify himself. He said they'd been misled, that Dr. Patterson had exaggerated, that they never meant to hurt me. I listened, and when he finished, he simply said, "It's all right, Daniel. Now you know I still make my own decisions." And I hung up. I thought it was the end, that they would have learned their lesson. But I was wrong, because 2 weeks later Peter called me. He said he had discovered something serious. Rebecca had tried to open a joint account in my name, without my authorization, using forged documents. She had signed my name on forms. She had forged my signature, and the bank luckily had become suspicious and blocked the transaction. But the attempt was documented. Peter asked if I wanted to sue. I thought about it, not out of anger, out of exhaustion, out of disappointment, but mainly because I realized that if I did nothing, they would try again and again until they succeeded, or until I was truly incapacitated, and then there would be no defense. So I authorized it. Peter filed a lawsuit for document forgery and attempted fraud. Rebecca was notified. Daniel was also notified for complicity, since the forms contained information that only he could have provided. They both hired lawyers. They denied everything. They said it was a misunderstanding, that Rebecca was just trying to make my life easier. But the proof was there. The forged signature, the forms, the history of previous attempts. The case didn't go to trial. The bank didn't want to prosecute criminally because I was a long-time customer, and they wanted to avoid public exposure. But they demanded that Rebecca sign a statement of responsibility, that she acknowledge the attempt, that she commit to never trying something like that again, and that she pay an administrative fine. She signed, but the damage was done. I stopped answering calls. I stopped replying to messages. Rebecca tried to visit me. I didn't open the door. Daniel sent emails. I didn't read them. They turned to cousins, friends, anyone who could intercede. They all told me the same thing. They are your children. They made a mistake, but you need to forgive them. I wasn't angry. I was tired. Tired of being seen as a problem, as a resource, as something to be managed. They never asked me what I wanted. They never cared about my opinion, only about my money, my house, my life insurance. And when I didn't make it easy, they tried to take it from me by force. I decided to completely revise my will. I contacted Peter. I told him I wanted to make changes. He advised caution. He said that disinheriting them completely could lead to new lawsuits, disputes, years of legal battles. I didn't want that. I didn't want them to get rich after I died. But I also didn't want to become a cause for conflict. So we did something different. I kept a small portion of the inheritance for each of them, enough so they wouldn't contest it. But the majority, about 80%, was set aside for a foundation I created, focused on supporting war veterans, mental health programs, reintegration, things that have always mattered to me. The foundation would have an independent governing board They wouldn't have access, they wouldn't have control, they wouldn't have anything beyond the legal minimum. The house would be excluded from the will. I transferred it while still alive to an irrevocable trust. With a lifetime usufruct clause, in other words, while I am alive, the house is mine. When I die, it will be sold, and the proceeds will go entirely to the foundation. Rebecca and Daniel won't see a penny. I documented everything. Peter assured me it was legally protected. There was no loophole, there was no room for dispute. And then, one Thursday afternoon, I called Rebecca and Daniel for a meeting. At my house, for the first time in months. They came anxious. They thought I would give in. That I would forgive. That everything would go back to normal. We sat in the room. I had the documents on the table. I said I wanted to clarify a few things, that I had made decisions, and that they needed to know. Rebecca tried to interrupt. I asked her to wait. Daniel crossed his arms. I began. I explained that I knew everything, about the attempts to declare me incapacitated, about the forged signatures, about the conversations behind my back, about the lies spread about my health. I said I had proof, that I had medical reports attesting to my full capacity, that I had records of all the fraudulent attempts, and that, therefore, I had taken action. I showed him the new will. I explained the foundation, the allocation of assets, the future sale of the house. Rebecca turned white. Daniel turned red. He exploded. He said I was being manipulated, that Peter was using me, that I was making a mistake. I let him speak. When he finished, I simply said, "This is my decision, and you have no power over it." Rebecca started to cry. She said that everything they did was out of love, out of concern, that I was being unfair, that they were my children. I looked at her and said, "You wanted my money, not my company. If you wanted my company, you would have asked me what I wanted. You wouldn't have decided for me." She didn't answer, because she had nothing to answer. Daniel tried to negotiate. He said we could reverse everything, that we could start over. That they would change. I said no, that the decisions were made, that they would receive what I decided to leave, and that this was non-negotiable. He stood up. He said they were going to contest it. I said they could try, but they would lose, because everything was legal, everything was documented, and I was still alive and lucid and in control. They left furious, but without options. Weeks passed. I received one last attempt at contact, a letter from Rebecca, handwritten, long, asking for forgiveness, saying she had been wrong, that she didn't know what had gotten into her, that the money had confused everything, that she only wanted my love back. I read the letter 3 times and kept it, but I didn't reply, because I realized something important. Forgiving didn't mean going back. It didn't mean giving second chances. It didn't mean forgetting. I could forgive them for trying to take away my autonomy, but I couldn't trust them again. And without trust, there was no relationship, only obligation. Daniel tried a different approach. He hired another lawyer. They filed a request to review the will, alleging undue influence by Peter. The judge, the same one as before, denied it without even scheduling a hearing. She said the case history clearly showed who had tried to exert undue influence, and it wasn't my lawyer. That was their last move. After that, silence. They stopped calling, stopped visiting, stopped trying. They went on living their lives. I went on living mine, without resentment, but without illusions. Months later, at a veterans group meeting, one of my friends asked me about my children, if they were doing well. I said yes, that they were living their lives. He asked if I missed them. I thought about it and I replied, I miss what I thought they were, not what they became. Today, at 75, I live alone, but not lonely. I have friends, I have a routine, I have health, I have peace, and I have control over my own life, which in the end was all I wanted. I didn't need to shout, I didn't need to fight. I just needed to realize it early and act at the right time. Looking back, I see that their mistake was underestimating my lucidity. They thought age was synonymous with weakness, that silence was synonymous with ignorance, That patience was synonymous with passivity. It wasn't. I was observing, understanding, planning, and when they realized it, it was too late. Some people ask me if I don't regret it, if I don't think about leaving everything to them anyway. After all, they are my children. And I answer, precisely because they are my children, I cannot reward them for trying to destroy me. That would be teaching them that manipulation works, that disrespect is tolerable, that love is conditional on money. The foundation I created is already up and running, even before my death. I transferred part of the resources while I was still alive. It has already helped dozens of veterans, therapy programs, reintegration into the job market, temporary housing, concrete things, useful things, things that make a difference. And when I die, it will continue. For decades, maybe centuries. My name will be there, not as a tribute, but as a purpose. Rebecca texted me a few weeks ago, on my phone, short, saying she understood, that she respected my decision, that she hoped I was okay. She didn't ask for anything, she didn't offer anything. She just acknowledged it. I didn't reply, but I kept the message. Because maybe one day she'll really understand. Daniel never contacted me again. I heard from others that he's doing well, that he's still in Seattle, that work is going well, that his children are growing up. I don't feel resentment, just indifference, which is in a way worse than anger, because anger is still a feeling, indifference is absence. My health remains good. I have regular checkups. I maintain my routine. I read. I walk. I participate in group activities. I eat out once a week. I have a simple life, and a full one, without depending on anyone, without owing explanations, without carrying the weight of expectations that were never mine. Not long ago I met a woman, Dorothy, also a widow. She attends the same veterans group. We started talking, then we had coffee. Nothing romantic, just company. Someone to share stories with. Someone who understands what it's like to live through this phase of life without dramatizing it, without infantilizing it, without overprotecting it. I told her about Rebecca and Daniel, about everything. She listened without judgment. Then she said something that stuck with me. You didn't punish them, you only protected yourself, and that's not selfishness, it's survival. She was right. I didn't do it for revenge. I did it out of necessity. Because if I hadn't acted, I would have lost everything, including my dignity. Dorothy has children too, 3, and she has a completely different relationship with them. They visit her, they ask her opinion, they respect her choices. I see the difference. And I understand that the problem wasn't with me. It was in the way Rebecca and Daniel chose to see me, as a resource, not as a person. Today, my house is in order. My documents are organized. My will is registered. My foundation is active. There's nothing pending, nothing open. When I die, everything will go according to plan. No fights, no disputes, no drama, because I took care of it while I still could. And that's the biggest lesson I can leave you with. If you're going through something similar, if you feel your family sees you as a problem, as a burden, as something to be managed, don't ignore it, don't accept it, don't put it off, protect yourself, legally, emotionally, financially, because nobody will do it for you. And expecting people to change out of kindness is naive. I realized it early, and I acted in time. I could have waited. I could have believed they would change, but they didn't, and if I had waited, I would have lost everything, my house, my money, my freedom, my dignity, everything, just because they thought I didn't realize. But I did realize, very early. So today, at 75, I live in peace. It's not the life I imagined when my children were small. When I thought we would grow old together, that they would take care of me with affection, that I would be the respected patriarch. It's not that, but it's not a tragedy either. It's reality. And reality, you learn to accept. I don't hate Rebecca or Daniel. I don't wish them ill, I just don't trust them. And I'm not going to pretend to trust them just because they're my children. Blood doesn't justify everything. It doesn't erase attempts at fraud. It doesn't undo lies. It doesn't rebuild respect. Respect is built, and they destroyed ours. What keeps me at peace is knowing that I did what was right, Not what was easiest, not what people expected, but what was right for me. I protected my autonomy, my dignity, my right to decide about my own life. And that in the end is worth more than any inheritance. You, who are listening to this now, might recognize something of what I've said. Perhaps you're experiencing something similar. Or perhaps you know someone who is. And if that's the case, I tell you, don't wait. Don't believe things will get better on their own. Don't trust that people will respect your wishes just because you're old. Old age doesn't bring automatic respect. It brings vulnerability. And there are people who will use that against you. Protect yourself while you can, while you're lucid, while you have the strength, because later it may be too late. And then you become a hostage to decisions that others made for you, without consulting you, without respecting you, just managing your existence as if you were a problem to be solved. Don't be that problem. Be the solution. For yourself. I stopped explaining myself, because I realized it was pointless. They had already decided who I was in their minds, a confused old man, an obstacle, a belated inheritance. But I was none of that. I was and still am a lucid man, capable, independent, and in control of my own life. And that nobody can take away from me, not with power of attorney, not with a lawsuit, not with emotional blackmail. Today, when I look out the window of my house, I feel gratitude, not for what I lost, but for what I preserved, my peace, my autonomy, my right to choose. And if that costs me my relationship with my children, then so be it. Because a relationship based on control is not a relationship. It's domination, and I refuse to be dominated. Not at 75, not ever. If you've made it this far, thank you. I know it was long, but it needed to be complete, because stories like this don't have shortcuts. They are built slowly and resolved slowly. So, if you felt this made sense, if you recognized something, or if you simply thought it was worth listening to, leave a like. Subscribe to the channel. Because there are more stories like this, of people who realized early on, who acted at the right time, and who preserved their dignity until the end. You are not alone in this, and neither am I.